So you've realized you're on the sprint treadmill and you want to get off? You've decided as a company to fix the problem once and for all, or at the very least you're looking into that option right now. Well, I'm going to show you what it looks like to go through a full sprint reboot. Let's get right into it. Sprint deadlock, or the sprint treadmill, is a state development teams often find themselves in after several weeks or months of working together. If you haven't watched my other video on this topic, I suggest you click the card on the video now and watch the first video of the series, titled Agile Problems: Are You Agile or Fragile? Breaking free from the sprint deadlock. I'm guessing if you're here, that's where you find yourself. It doesn't matter what your role is on the development team. Right now, I'm just going to show you a typical 2-week reboot schedule. So first of all, we'll go through a project overview. That's to get everyone on the same page, including me if I'm an outside consultant coming and helping with this, on the goals and the deadlines of the project. Also, we talk about the last 4 to 6 months worth of work and the next 4 to 6 months worth of work, ideally. Then we go over the roles on an agile team. This may seem obvious at first who is going to be carrying out these roles, but I think it's good to review, and in particular, I think a lot of teams need to really establish a product owner versus a project manager and have two distinct roles, if at all possible, within those areas. After lunch, we go into the Agile Manifesto and Agile Review. This is just a very high-level overview of the Agile methodology, and I think it's good, again, getting everybody on the same page. Even if you have gone through this type of training before, even if everybody on the team feels they already know what they're doing, it's probably a good idea to just do a quick review and turn it into a discussion, because what we really want to do is have everybody in line with what Agile looks like on this team, not just what it looked like on a past team that for a company that they used to work for. The last hour to hour and a half, we're going to focus on backlog grooming, since this is what we're going to spend a lot of time on during the sprint. We may even try estimating out some sample tasks or some real tasks if that's possible. Then usually what I like to do is release the dev team early so that I can have a direct meeting with the product owner and the project manager and go over the tickets that are upcoming that need to be estimated in future backlog grooming sessions. On the next day, we go into backlog grooming really in depth, and we figure out, first of all, how to trim the backlog by prioritizing. We need to determine what are we going to work on now, what are we going to work on soon, which is in the next 3 to 6 months, and what are we probably going to work on eventually, which is more than 6 months out, and then what are some of the items that we're not going to work on for sure within the next 12 months. We want to still catalog these things because there's a lot of good ideas that have been put down on tickets that we don't want to lose. However, by moving it into a separate status, which is not going to work on now, it allows us to come back to those ideas in the future, and it also captures our conversations on them so that we don't forget and keep having the same conversation over and over. We're going to go into some practice planning poker sessions where developers are going to estimate some tasks, and that's about it for review backlog section. After that, we go into effective subtasking and spikes, where we're going to go over, oftentimes you don't have enough information to estimate out a ticket just based on what's being presented in the story. So rather than force a estimation that is most likely going to be wrong, it is better to create a spike and assign that spike to a developer for more research. Typically, the project manager is going to time box that spike into a period, maybe 1 or 2 hours. Could be longer depending on the scope of what they're researching, but whatever you think is the right amount of time for the developer to research what it's going to take to even finish this story. And then the goal is that they write up a document that they can present in a future meeting where they can say, well, this is my proposal for finishing this story. Oftentimes when you have a story large enough that it's going to take more than a few days to work on, you're going to want to subtask it out. Sometimes that means breaking it up into different stories and working on those stories individually. Sometimes that means having a main story and then creating subtasks within your project management system. The more detail you have and the more subtasks you have on a larger task, the more accurate the estimate is going to be. Then we're going to go into a backlog grooming session. Again, I recommend that these be 45 minutes maximum, but you can wrap up early. After that, we're going to have a discussion on why a 2-week sprint. A lot of companies will try to go with a 1-week sprint, or I've seen 3-week sprints, I've seen 1-month sprints. We talk about the rationale behind having a 2-week sprint and sort of hitting that sweet spot. Then, if we finish early, then we're going to release the dev team, or the dev team can stay and self-study. But then I will go into a training with project managers and product owners on stories and epics, and essentially how to organize your project management systems so that you're getting good feedback. It's not enough to just create a bunch of stories and then wait until the stories are done to get feedback. It is better to organize things so that you're getting more frequent feedback, and we'll go into that during this session. Then on Wednesday of the first week, we go into sprint planning in the daily stand-up. We talk about how to effectively use these meetings for your team moving forward. After that, we talk about elaboration meetings. Elaboration meetings are completely optional, and they're probably not something that's going to be on a reoccurring schedule for your team. However, it's important that if you have more than one developer that's going to be working on a particular feature set, they should have some meetings to go over the strategy of that so that all of those developers are on the same page. Similarly, you may want to have elaboration meetings between the product owner and the project manager, or the project manager and different managers in the business, so that you can get more information about a ticket or a story. And really, you want to have those meetings at first without the developers, so you can collect as much information without interrupting the development lifecycle. And then later on, if you need to bring developers into these business elaboration meetings, it may make sense. Then after lunch, we'll do another 45-minute backlog grooming session. A lot of people at this point ask if it's too much in terms of, are we doing too many backlog grooming sessions? And I would say no, because the purpose of the sprint reboot is to get out of deadlock. And if you're in deadlock, that usually means that there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the backlog in order to get things estimated properly and start planning properly for what tasks can actually be completed moving forward. Then we go over some effective real-time communication strategies. That is, how to use Slack, how and when to use email, how and when to schedule meetings, because nobody wants to get overwhelmed with too many meetings. Remember, every time a meeting happens, all forward progress stops. So meetings can be a very effective way of getting everybody on the same page, because you have everybody's focus all at once. But we talk about being careful about using meetings as a tool that too often that will take away your focus too much on a project. I remember being on a team at one point where they were doing weekly elaboration meetings. They were doing sprint planning that went at least 2 hours. They were doing other meetings that were going way too long as well. And I really felt like the first half of my day as a developer or more was meetings, and I only had like 3 or 4 hours to get stuff done. Some days I had 0. So it's really important to go over how to communicate with your team without taking developers out of flow state, without shooting yourself in the foot a bit, because you're taking away project hours, development time that they could be using to work on your upcoming features. Then on Thursday of the first week, we go into a lot of detail on the sprint retrospective and how to conduct demo meetings. Of course, demo meetings can just be internal to your team, where a developer shows off their progress for the last sprint, or it could be with a member of the business or many members of the business. Could be a more formal demo where you invite members of the business to a demo at a specific time, and you're expecting department heads to come and take a look at what you've been working on. But we go into the detail of how that should be executed and how to maximize that time, because again, it's another meeting, it can take a lot of time, but I think it's important to do demos to get the business in the feedback loop so that you can have conversations about how we're doing and what priorities need to be changed moving forward to meet the business's expectations. And then of course the retrospective is the development team's way of looking back at the last sprint and reviewing what was working, what is not working, how they can change things in the future, because it's about constant improvement. It's impossible to get everything perfect every single week, every single sprint, but as long as you're improving as a team over time and things are getting better and tasks are getting estimated better and everything continues to get better and more smooth moving forward, then we're going to spend some time talking about how to stay out of deadlock using the strategies talked about up to this point. And yes, yet another backlog grooming session. After that, I like to encourage the team to do some self-study, because different developers may feel that they need to look at different areas of the agile process, and this will be good because we're going to have a Q&A meeting on the Friday of the first week where they can ask any of the questions that they still have. On Friday of the first week, we go into quarterly iteration planning, which again is an optional meeting that not every team does, but it's something that can help stay out of deadlock. Because what it basically means is once you get organized to a point where you can have enough things to look at, you can start having a quarterly meeting where as a team you go over the backlog together with the product owners, the project managers, the other members of the team, and you start planning what exactly you're going to work on for the next 3 months. Doesn't necessarily mean that you estimate everything, because you keep everything very high level and you're not going to go into the details of all of the tasks, but you at least have a very high level overview. And of course the business is involved with this. They have to be involved with this because they need to tell you what the marketing initiatives are going to be, because certainly the marketing initiatives for fourth quarter coming into Christmas is probably going to be different than the marketing initiatives going into summer. So it's important to have these quarterly iteration planning meetings and go over what are the high-level business goals for the next 3 months, what are the high-level development goals for the next 3 months. And if you can't do this right away, that is okay. But it's to give you a long-term goal that you're going to move toward. Also on Friday, we'll do a 1-hour Q&A meeting, and it could go longer than that. It depends on how many questions everyone has. But this is your chance to get your questions answered. This is your chance to get on the same page, because I know from my perspective working as a developer on development teams, if I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, then how can I meet those expectations, right? So this is the chance to ask those questions, not just for the consultant that's coming in to assist with the 2-week reboot schedule, but this could also be questions for the project manager and other business owners to understand what the expectations are of the development team moving forward. And then of course we have another backlog grooming session. Then we talk a little bit about tech debt, how to handle tech debt, how to track tech debt, how to set up sprints that are designed to reduce tech debt, and getting the businesses okay on this. Again, tech debt can be a really complicated topic, and it's difficult to get business on board with addressing tech debt, but it's very important to talk about and to figure out how to manage this moving forward. On the second week, we're going to start off with the plan for the upcoming week, and it's going to be presented similar to a sprint planning session, but we're going to focus on week 2 of the sprint reboot and exactly what is left. After that, we're going to go into tech debt review, and we're going to ask everybody to write down some areas that they see tech debt in the project since last week. I mean, everybody is going to be able to identify some tech debt in the code that they wrote or in some code that they reviewed. That's almost guaranteed. So it's important to really get this down on paper and eventually into the project management system and talk about that. Then we're going to do a technology review. A lot of times projects have been started maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Sometimes I've seen even longer. I worked on a project that was using Objective-C in 2020, I think it was. And of course, Swift and some newer technology has come out after that. And code was a mess, frankly. So one of the things that we identified during technology review is the need to start working toward a rewrite, because the current technology stack was no longer meeting the business goals. It was not possible to just change things overnight. It was not possible to support other platforms such as Android without creating another version of the app. So we talked about, if we're going to create another version of the app anyway, maybe we should leverage a framework that allows us to work on both at the same time. So those are the kind of things that usually come up during a technology review. It's a time for the developers to really come in with their opinions about how can we improve, what technologies, what libraries, what things could we be using instead that would be better and make development easier and make features flow much more quickly. Then we have another backlog grooming session and another backlog grooming session after lunch. One of the things you'll notice in the second week is we are ramping up our backlog grooming sessions to be one before and one after lunch. Of course, if we just don't have enough tasks to go over to do 2 per day, we don't need to do 2 per day. But as I said, the idea is to get ahead. You want to get at least 1 month ahead, where you have enough tasks already estimated out that you can put into 2-week sprints. So that's why we have so many backlog grooming sessions. After this, we're going to encourage the developers to go into research, because we've talked about, I remember the technology review, and we talked about the tech debt review. So there's a lot of stuff here where they need to go back and maybe discuss amongst themselves, or maybe go back to the code repository and start researching. But we're going to ask them, what are some things that they would like to suggest to change. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be able to change immediately or at all, but they need to at least voice their concerns and bring up their opinions and ideas moving forward, so we can get some spikes on the project management schedule, so that if we cannot get the research done this week, then we're doing ongoing research from here on out, even if it's just 2 hours a week, so that we're constantly improving our knowledge and improving the product as much as possible. And then of course I will encourage the product owner and project managers to continue using any downtime you might have during this reboot to reorganize the backlog, reprioritize the backlog, get more stories into the backlog, start building up this list of spikes or review topics, research topics that the developers are coming up with, and getting that all organized into the backlog in the project management system so that we can start discussing them moving forward. The rest of the week, at least through Thursday, is going to look very, very similar, because we want to focus on developers doing research, continuing the tech review, continuing the tech debt review, and project managers using this time to update and organize their backlog. We're still going to keep doing the backlog grooming sessions before and after lunch, and we're going to do developer research in the afternoons as well. And during these days, I encourage the developers to pair up, at least find a partner to do these discussions with, so that you're not just on your own reading code, but think of it like paired programming, but you're doing paired research where you're collecting this information. If nothing else, then you can have one person taking notes, another person browsing the code, and of course you'll both be kind of browsing over their shoulder, but it's a good way to get some great information and ideas for things that we need to work on moving forward. Then on Friday, we are going to have a 2-hour review and a QA meeting. So this, again, is to go over any questions that anybody may have. There's a lot of topics that have been covered over the past 2 weeks. There's a lot of things that have been reviewed on our own code and our own processes. So it's important to talk about what it is that we went over, what it is that we found, and then ask questions amongst each other, further clarify where we're going. Backlog grooming sessions, and then more developer research. 2 hours prior to the end of the day, I want to do something similar to a sprint retrospective. And it's not going to be like a typical sprint retrospective, but we are still going to ask the questions: what went well, what didn't go well, and what are the action items going forward, just in regards to the reboot process that the team just went over. And we're going to also commit to what meetings we are going to have and at what intervals in the upcoming week for the first new rebooted sprint. After that, it's the end of the week, because at the end of the retrospective, even if it gets done early, it's the end of the week, Everybody gets to turn off from work, they get to have a well-deserved break over the weekend so that they can come in Monday morning fresh, do the sprint planning, and start their next sprint. Now, the reason a 2-week schedule is preferred is the same reason I recommend 2-week sprint. It seems to be the sweet spot where there's enough time for teams to make real progress, but not so much as to be drawn out. Think about this. If you have a team of 5 people in any role, PM, developers, whatever, in the US, you are probably paying about $10,000 per month for each of these team members on average, and in some areas that might be base salary only, no benefits. Taking that as a baseline, that means that the company is spending $50,000 a month just to employ the team. So if you were the business owner and spending $50,000 monthly on staff, you would have a fairly high expectation of what they can accomplish, right? A great software product can be worth millions of dollars. It can generate far more in cash flow than $50,000 a month. I've seen it before. But my point is that time is money, and I want to address the issue that if you pay $50,000 monthly, then you are paying at least $25,000 for a full stop for 2 weeks, plus any consulting fees if you are bringing in someone to help. More on that later. Now, if you are already in sprint deadlock, I would argue that most of your forward progress has stopped anyway. Each week you prolong this state, you are just burning more money. But maybe you aren't in complete deadlock, and it's more like you know you're running at 50% or less productivity. Okay, if you could boost your productivity moving forward by 2 times, just by stopping for 2 weeks, would that be worth it? Of course, because you could easily make up those 2 weeks in a month's time moving forward. Now, what happens if you have a live product that requires ongoing developer support? Well, this is another topic you are going to address on your reboot journey, how to minimize the development team's active involvement in support. If that's not possible, how to handle ongoing support without slowing down development. But for now, you don't have to put a full stop on support tasks. I understand you can't in many cases. All I'm asking is to hit the pause button on feature development for a moment, take a breath, and invest some time in making things better. Let me tell you a story about a client of mine who invested in the process I'm talking to you about now. For the sake of maintaining the non-disclosure agreement, and frankly they didn't give me permission to talk about them, I will not be mentioning the company's name. This company, we will call Sportsco, had an application that would connect sports trainers in a particular industry to students wishing to work on their game. The idea was that trainers would have their own app and students would use another app to locate a trainer who would work with them on improvement of their sport. This was done by an exchange of videos and some other data from devices such as pressure mats they would stand on. The company was in sprint deadlock. There were many reasons for this, but I would say the biggest reason was, like many ambitious companies, they simply started out with just 1 or 2 developers and built an idea as quickly as possible. They developed an MVP, minimum viable product, to take to market and see if the idea would become popular and profitable. The idea was a huge success, and this was even before the COVID lockdowns, where people were really forced to look at remote training if they were to keep working on their game with a trainer. Once 2020 started, everyone was shut inside, bored and looking to keep their hobbies alive and stay active. The growth of their app exploded, and suddenly they went from a 2-person development team with a single member who was in charge of many other departments to 6 developers. A new project manager? They grew their sales and marketing teams just as much. And suddenly they had 1,000 ideas from clients that needed to be implemented now. Good problems to have, right? Well, like most companies, the assumption was they would just hire the best team members and everything would work out. Development teams are a little bit more complicated than that to manage. With many new members coming on the team suddenly, there were many unproven faces trying to learn the application as quickly as possible. The veteran staff had their hands full just training. And the influx of new tasks from marketing were not being prioritized or even fully documented. Often they were just vague stories in Jira. The only thing the team could do was a full stop. There were too many unmanaged tasks being discussed and new projects that were not even filtered going to the development team. In that 2-week period, we learned that the team wasn't a team. It was more like several siloed projects with just a single developer working on them. The PM was struggling to collect tasks, but it didn't matter because the marketing team and other members of the small company were going directly to a single developer they were used to working with and giving them tasks. Furthermore, we learned the app technology they were using was based on Objective-C and had been built on top of for at least 4 to 5 years by different developers. At one point, they made a copy of their main app and essentially forked it into 2 different repositories for different products rather than making a specific app designed for a specific task. In that sprint reboot, we discovered more than just the team could be better managed. Certainly, we addressed how to become a truly unified agile team with tasks passing through the proper channels, challenged, prioritized, and documented. But we also discovered the technology needed a reboot so they could move faster in the future, and we structured a plan for proper mobile application that would meet the needs of the users on phones and tablets, iOS and Android. We enhanced the plan for the company's APIs and committed to following more flexible practices such as microservices over big, monolith services. And for the first time, we created a web application project specifically to address the marketing department's needs by giving them flexibility to customize the product without adding development tasks. Not every sprint reboot needs to be this dramatic, but in every sprint reboot I've been a part of, there have been project management improvements and product improvements. Just by getting the team on the same page through the training sessions, we uncover the problems and can work as a team to come to a better way of working moving forward. After all, it's not just about getting more work accomplished for the company. It's also about reducing stress and making it a better work environment for the employees doing the work. Imagine the difference coming to work for a job you dread every day and start work genuinely excited about the tasks moving forward that are before you. Of course, you'll get more done in the latter experience. That's it for this video. It's already going to be fairly long, I think. I hope I was able to give you the why and how of a sprint reboot by walking you through the specifics of the schedule and tell you about a real example. I will be continuing to add videos to this series, and you can watch them in the sprint reboot playlist. This will give you an idea of how to execute a sprint reboot within your team. However, I just want to also mention there is always a way to shortcut this or anything else in your business. You can either experiment yourself, or you can bring in an expert who has already had the experience doing this many times before. There is a cost to doing this, but as I mentioned, you are probably already spending over $50,000 monthly on the development team. You can either keep spending that with lowered results, or you can make a relatively small investment, and I can work with your team not just for the sprint reboot, but for the next few months afterwards to keep things running smoothly. When I take on a consulting client, it's never just a one and done thing. I will make myself available even a year after the sprint reboot if you have questions or feel like things are derailing. You will truly have an advocate on your side if you need help. Thank you for watching. Now go out and do great things. Trust me, I'm supporting you.